Today we're joined by Dr. Joe Carella from the University of Arizona. Dr. Joe, there he is. It's a pleasure to have you with us here today. Joe has been gracious enough to come in here today and talk to us about closing the talent gap in digital transformation. And we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Joe. Before we get started, if you didn't hear me say thank you all for joining us, this is the fourth in our Leading Digital Transformation webinar series. We are co-sponsored today by Signature Consultants, the leader in IT staffing across the US. And we're pleased to have Dr. Joe Carella from the University of Arizona give us a great session today on closing the gap. If you've got questions throughout the session, please feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A box or in the chat box, and I'll be monitoring that. We've got a couple of places throughout our session where we're going to pause and give you an opportunity to ask questions, and we'll keep track of anything that you want to talk about. So with that, Dr. Joe, thanks again. I'm handing it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kim. I'm going to do some sharing of my slides. So give me just 1 second while I do that. Here we go. All right. Are you able to see my slides okay? I guess.
Yes.
So. Excellent.
We can see them, Joe.
Excellent. So let me tell you a little bit about me. My background is both as a strategy consultant, and so in support to corporations as an academic, and then in the work that I do teaching corporations as well. The thing that I would note is that late in the 1990s, I worked in BT, and one of the first things that I got to work on was the ill-fated merger between AT&T and BT on the international business adventure called Concert. It gave me a real good appreciation of what not to do when it comes to integrating two very different organizations and letting technology drive the business while the business should be driving technology. So from an early day, I got a really good insight into that. Over the years, I got to work with a variety of companies, and right now I specialize in executive development, and I work a lot with organizations who are trying to change the way in which they integrate their digital and physical world. I work for University of Arizona. We are really well renowned when it comes to management information systems and entrepreneurship. And this interesting combination gives us a good insight into the challenges of developing good business models in the digital world while trying to make sense of how technology can help or hinder in the process. So why don't I start with giving you a little story. I was recently asked by a leading European organization to help it figure out how it could improve its leaders' digital acumen. One of the first things I was told by the company was that the company had launched a tech venture fund to drive innovation for its industry. And the senior leadership team was really excited at the possibilities this would create. So I went online, I read the press release on this initiative, and I was a bit puzzled because it seemed that the organization was already quite advanced. And I was wondering why they asked me to help. My first meeting with the senior executive team really cleared my doubts. The senior team had decided that they wanted to retain millennials and thought that this tech venture fund was the best vehicle to park its talent, the most talented workforce that they had, while it was trying to figure out its digital strategy. They had a lot of churn with their millennial talent. And one of the first things that they asked me was, can you please give us a crash course in digital keywords so that we could understand what the millennials are talking about? I'd call this bottoms-up, cluster bomb, not really sure what I'm doing, preparedness strategy, so not a good approach. And on a more serious note, here at Eller, we consider digital transformation, in fact, a question of organizational preparedness. Preparedness to the disruption that our business world is experiencing. What's driving this disruption in our minds is a virtuous or vicious circle of influence between changing social norms, behaviors, choices, and technological advances. Whether it is vicious or virtuous depends on where your organization stands on these 4 levels of preparedness that you see on the screen. In general, the most advanced organizations are, in our minds, the ones that have expanded their ability to align the 2 worlds of digital and physical in ways that create ecosystem value for themselves and critically for their customers. As a matter of fact, in that sense, to successfully ride these waves of change, leaders really need to rethink their approach to how they handle digital transformation. Our research tells us that the starting point of any successful transformation is the customer. This is why in our digital transformation model that you see on the screen, the customer sits at the heart of it all. In the process, we have uncovered not only how the organization, the most successful organizations, prioritize their initiatives, and along what we describe as 4 dimensions of change, but also the specific lines of actions that are presented here, circling the 4 dimensions that I just talked about. We have done specific research that points to the areas where the biggest gaps exist, and I'll get to that in just a couple of minutes. But before I do that, I want to make sure that you understand that there are multiple choices that your organizations can take to aim for that digital transformation. The question is, what are the specific priorities for your organizations? How do those 6 lines of actions break down into specific initiatives? Those are questions that you should be asking yourself. And by the way, I'll be happy to share the breakdown of these 6 lines of actions as we have identified them for those of you that are interested in it offline through emails and through an online dialogue. The thing that it's worth keeping in mind is that, and it's worth reminding ourselves, is that not all organizations are at the same point in the digital transformation journey. And that's why we have divided organizations into 4 distinct groups. I'm going to show you in the next slides what I mean with that. But essentially, when you think of your own organization, you might want to think specifically where you are at with that digital transformation process and what that means for you. So here are the 4 stages of digital readiness as we have identified them at University of Arizona. We go from survivalists who tend to have not just more limited technology capabilities and infrastructure, but also in general less sophisticated management skills, to symbiotics who seem to combine both of those traits at a higher level of capability. I'm going to stop there and give you a minute or so to look at the chart. There's a lot of content there, and you might also have some questions. So I'm just going to stop there for a second and see what comments you might have.
Thank you, Joe. Yes, so anybody that's got questions, if you want to pose your questions in the Q&A box or in the chat box, we can go ahead and capture those. While people are thinking about their questions, Joe, I did want to reinforce, I think, a point that you made from the earlier slide, which I thought was very interesting, that digital transformation really begins with the customer, right?
Oh, yeah.
And really thinking about how do we create value for the business, and create a stronger relationship with the customer. We've often talked for years, right, about getting the voice of the customer into the organization. Digital transformation really gives us an opportunity to do that. If we can effectively leverage these digital technologies to capture data and to move that data across the organization more horizontally. We heard about this a little bit in our data analytics webinar with Brian Shield of the Red Sox, where they're very attuned to trying to understand what the fans are looking for and how to enhance that fan experience, and capturing data to then drive different ways to keep fans engaged in the baseball experience.
Great point. And I would add something to that. In an era in which I think we are getting a lot of questions around the validity of data anyway, and does it really tell us what's going on? I think that organizations cannot afford not to understand where the customer is at. And for me, that's comprised of 2 points. So I'm a data fan. I get analytics. I strongly support it. But I also feel that there are plenty of times when actually customers don't really know what they want. It's not clear to them. They haven't formulated it. And even when they tell you what they want, when it comes to actually practicing what their desire and needs are, sometimes they fall short and they do something else. So for me, true successful understanding of the customer in a digital age relies on 2 things. One thing is the data analytics and gathering as much data as you possibly can so that you can understand your customer. But the other is user-centered design, really looking at where the customer is at. And by the way, gathering data points through user-centered design too. Understanding where the customer is at, understanding how they're using what they're using, understanding their lives and how they go through experiences. It's another important dimension that should not be underrated. A company that I've seen do that really, really well is a financial services company in Singapore called DBS. They're doing tremendous work by bringing together the customer into hackathon formats with designers, both internal and externals, internal and external designers, so that they can better understand what the customer wants and how they engage with their products.
That's great. Hey, Joe, we've got a couple of questions from the audience.
Sure.
These 2 questions are related, so I'm gonna hit both of them at the same time. One person asked. Make it
too hard.
Yeah. One person asked, where do you find most people among these 4 stages of readiness? And how do you effectively move organizations from one stage to the next? And the related question is, do you find specific industries in the survivalist category, or is it mixed? So looking at the survivalist category first, are there a mix of industries there? And then if you look across all of these categories, where do you see the most people today with respect to readiness, and how do you move organizations up the ladder? So let's hit those 2 for now, and then we've got another one just came in.
Yeah, that's a great question. Those are great questions. And I'm gonna put the second one off for a little bit, if you will allow me, just because it comes later in the webinar. So that's a good reason not to get off the webinar and stay on with us. But the first one is a great question. And the reality is, and I'm going to answer it in 2 parts. The first part is that a lot of companies seem to be stuck in the middle. So between integrators, advancers, and in one thing that I would also like to mention is that corporations have found companies, especially large companies, sometimes being advancers in certain areas and in other areas being integrators. It really depends on which functions we're talking about. And so some functions tend to take a bigger lead than others. And so you find them stuck in between. When it comes to the second part of the answer that I wanted to give you, is that in many ways, it also depends on their business model. So when we're talking about very sophisticated customer intimacy, there are elements of human interactions that still cannot be replaced by digital, no matter how hard we try. So for companies that are especially proud in the way in which they engage and they create that very profound customer intimacy, I don't even know that they need to be at an advanced level at this point in time. I don't think that technology really allows it anyway. So when you look at your organization, you really need to be thinking, what do I stand for? What is my value proposition? That's a great starting point. And then kind of align the technology to the value proposition and not the other way around. To answer the second part, how can, sorry, the third part, because there's a third part to this. To answer the third part, how can companies advance? I'm going to give you at the very end two models that we've used, two learning labs that we've used that help companies shift from one stage to the next, and I'll talk more about that at the very end. So another good reason to stay online with me and Kim.
Okay, great. We get a couple more questions, Joe. Now this one, you may want to make part of that, that later conversation as well, but I'm going to put it out there for you. What strategies are being used to address different business units, moving at different timelines and initiatives, being pushed by the tech side of the business versus being driven from the business unit or customer-centric?
That's a great question, and I'm going to address it when I talk about the role that leaders need to have as integrators and architects.
Okay, great. So we'll capture that there. We've got one from Scott Gallagher. Can you speak to differences between business and technology in terms of adopting a digital mindset?
Ooh, that's a great question, and I would love to be able to kind of tackle that almost in a separate webinar, because there's quite a bit that needs to be addressed there. At a macro level, from my perspective, the differences in adoption of digital are, the most fundamental one is I find that most business leaders adopt digital because they see it as a, unfortunately, in many cases, as a Me Too strategy. They see their competitors. And when it comes to technology, I think that there is an approach that says, shiny object, how can I have it? And those, for me, are the wrong reasons for driving digital. The reality is that if we go back to what I was talking about earlier, it should be where our social behavioral changes are at that should be driving digital. That should be our starting point. And one of the biggest challenges that I see is that in many cases, I don't see business leaders and technologists speaking the same language, which means that they will look at what is happening in the business environment with a very different lens, either from a feature perspective, i.e. what other features can I add to what I have already, or from the perspective of I need to make sure that I stay competitive, so if my competitor is doing, I'm doing it too. And those are the wrong choices.
That is a very interesting question, and I appreciate you offering those insights, Joe. I do think that would be a phenomenal, more in-depth conversation to talk about the differences in perspective and how do you evolve that?
I agree. Part of the work that we do here is actually creating a common digital language between business leaders and technologists. I find that it happens so frequently that I will get people from the business side and people from the IT side in the same room and find that they're fundamentally trying to solve the very problem, but they're the very same problem, but they're looking at it from perspectives that are really grounded in what they've always done. And in the era of digital, that's not an option. You can't go to things from the perspective of how you've done things in the past, but really you need to look at it as a paradigm shift. That means we are actually rebuilding, in many cases, the ways in which we do business, as opposed to adding on or featuring up, adding new features to what we have already.
Right, right. Okay, one more question, and then we're going to move on. So
Sure.
from Dr. Mark Adkins, how are you using collaboration technology to elicit the voice of the customer? I'm finding many digital transformation professionals are focused on classic interview techniques, but some are engaged in structured collaboration to create a collective intelligence.
Oh, I see a bias in that question. Hey, Mark. So it's a great point, though, and I want to recognize the work that Mark is doing in this area. The reality is that by not creating a common platform to then allow for this language to be then created and experimented, then we're doing a disservice to the business, because traditionally business leaders have been using certain tools and IT leaders have been using others, and those don't necessarily always match. I appreciate the work that Mark is doing in trying to create a common platform that everyone can use.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a whole nother conversation that
Yes, it is. And Mark is your best guy to lead that conversation.
Yes, yes, we're going to do that. Okay, let's move on. So moving beyond the stages of digital readiness.
Moving beyond and going to the specifics of talent. Now that we've kind of figured out that there are multiple stages, and we figured out that companies really need to better be more mindful as to how they develop and create a common culture, the way in which they respond to the customer, then we need to understand where is it that some of the gaps are in terms of talent and leadership capabilities. In 2016, so just last year, we launched a piece of research aimed at senior executives across Forbes 2000 companies. We asked them to reflect a little bit on gaps in talent that they were experiencing across the organization. And what you see here are some aggregate data on some of their key talent areas. So you'll see the yellow bar that kind of says where they think they're at, the blue bar that points to the level of priority, how important it is to their organization in terms of needing to be addressed and emphasis that they need to place on. And brownish, orangish, reddish bar, depending on your RGB on your screen, is hard to implement. How easy it is to make it happen. What I wanted you to focus on is obviously those areas where it's hard to implement and it's a priority, as you might imagine. I don't think that there is anything that is surprising about the way that leaders pointed to those areas as being critical. I don't think that there is anything strange about it. What was surprising to us and what struck us was the illusionary sense of preparedness that they felt that they had when it came to themselves and their ability to find the right talent. And so their ability to lead and their ability to find the right talent. Because they recognized by the same token that they were not necessarily prepared to enable to lead a cultural and organizational transformation. So that really struck us. And going back to one of the original questions that was asked around the industries, we segmented this data by industry, and of course we found leaders and laggards across the board. There are companies in industry that are advanced and others that are not. What we have uncovered is that there were regionally some surprises. The US financial services sector was really trailing Asia and Europe in what should have been an area of leadership in our minds. What also surprised us was that digital transformation was not a permanent fixture in companies' board meetings. So for those of you that that are part of these conversations, I'm gonna throw a little challenge at you, which is, why are you not making digital transformation a standing topic in your board meetings? Why are you not making it so in your strategic reviews? We have taken the data and identified ways in which organizations, and we've then kind of done a little bit more analysis and identified ways in which organizations and the leaders can improve their digital transformation skills. And in those 6 lines of action for closing the gaps that we have identified, 2 especially apply. On one level, and that's the leaders as integrators and architects, it is personal. And leaders need to turn themselves into architects of change by building their own digital acumen and progressively building a vision of how this digital transformation applies to their organization. I don't think that an excuse ever is that my boss is not doing it, therefore I'm not. I think that for each function, there is a role that needs to be played, and ultimately your department can be the one that drives change inside the organization. I will also tell you that I'm not particularly a fan, and I think this came out in an interview that I did with Tech Republic a couple months ago. I'm not really a fan of organizations that create a chief integration officer or a chief digital officer. Apologies to the chief digital officers and CIOs in the room. I'm not a fan of organizations that create that figure and then kind of leave them to kind of just go off on your own and figure out digital for the organization. I think that that's not a good approach. It's my personal perspective, and I know that not everyone agrees with that. Because on another level, it is about creating digital realignment, and that's where we found most companies getting stuck at. Making sure that the organization progresses as a whole. Having digital be a bolt-on, as I was mentioning, or just adding the CDO is, in my opinion, not the right answer for digital transformation. But what you need to be driving is organization-wide cultural shifts that include knowledge as well as disruptive advances. And I'll talk about that in just a second, because I'm going to talk through some examples of companies that I feel have done that pretty well. So if we're ready to move on to that, and probably that's a good spot if we keep going, and I'll take you through some examples, then I'll be happy to take some questions on the specific examples, and I'll tell you how we've worked with some of these organizations. Oh, yes, by the way, before I get to that, forgotten. Here are some of the ways in which you can specifically do some of the work that I was referring to, and then I'll tell you about specific examples. One, for me, when it comes to leaders as integrators and architects, it occupies the entire spectrum of action that the leader can take. So using alternative modes for recruiting digital and more traditional talent, for me, it's a great way to go. I put the emphasis on more traditional talent, because if what you're trying to do is to change the organizational approach and the culture around digital, you're more likely to recruit more traditional talent through digital platforms, which will mean that they have greater digital acumen. So for me, that's a win-win. And so you get more advanced talent in traditional areas, such as operations or HR. If you're recruiting them through novel vehicles, then you stand a greater chance of finding talent that can actually cope with digital change than those that don't. You might want to identify talent development gaps and build digital acumen that way. I have been very surprised. I saw a stat which was, I think, put together by Capgemini, if I remember correctly, in which they said that only 4% of companies had actually integrated digital acumen as one of the skills that needed to be developed across the board in their talent recruitment, and specified clearly what that translated into actions for the different departments. And so the kind of digital acumen that you need in HR is very different from the one that you need in operations. So specifying it and breaking it down into components is a great way to go. Also happy to share a framework to help you identify priority areas. One of the things that I see is companies getting stuck not knowing how they need to prioritize their efforts. I'm happy to share the breakdown of those 6 lines of actions into specific initiatives. So if you want that, do let me know. I'm going to share my email address at the very end. But you can also obviously go through Kim. That's a great option too. When it comes to digital realignment, I think you need to assume first and foremost that the organization has already got a good cohort of integrators and architects, because if you don't, then you're going to get stuck pretty quickly. But essentially, great ways to create digital realignment is to find ways in which you can learn from others, acquire hustle, what I call is hustle, to get to things pretty quickly. By identifying micro pain points, there are things that at times are so blindly obvious, and little stopgaps that we can put in place that need to be addressed right away. It can be as basic as the way in which our website integrates with the rest of the organization. But also novel things that I've seen, and I'll talk more about that in a minute when I'll talk about the companies, is peer develop across companies. At times, it's interesting to see very different companies come together and learn from one another, and it can be a great way to advance quickly. And obviously, pilot and roll out. Just go for small pilots, see how it goes, and then see if you can kind of advocate through the success of your pilots.
Hey, Joe.
Yes.
Before you move on to the examples, we do have a good question here from the audience. How do you identify talent gaps? What specifically are you looking for? What types of competencies and acumen? Sounds like those 6 might answer this.
Yes, it does, and so we'll talk about it in a little bit. One way that I would say is that part of the action really needs to be around your priority areas, and so first you need to identify your priority areas, and then you identify where the talent gaps are. So that's one great way to go. The other thing to do is that I increasingly see, and this is going to be my little dirty secret that I'm going to share with you. Just look at your competitors, especially the ones that you see more advanced, and look what kind of job descriptions they're posting online in terms of recruiting talent. And that will give you a really good indication of whether you have those skills inside the organization or not. So that's a short, dirty way to get to it. But hey, you know, at times that's an easy fix, as opposed to having to go all cerebral and figuring out your strategy all in one go.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, we've got some information on that here that we can put forward too. We've done a lot of work here looking at what we see as some of the talent gaps in organizations that are trying to, you know, advance their digital capabilities. And it's not just technical. Clearly, there's a lot of soft skills that are needed, because you've got to think through the business and understand the needs of the business. You've got to be able to engage business leaders. Business leaders have to be able to engage IT effectively. So you've got that communication gap. And then, of course, there's the leadership skills. And you've kind of alluded to that throughout. Leadership is absolutely critical here with regards to thinking strategically and really thinking through ways to more effectively engage the workforce. leadership is fundamental to making it happen, but it all comes together if you have an engaged workforce that really can connect on this. So we've got some stuff too that we'll make available at the end of.
Excellent. Thank you, Kim.
Great.
So let's talk about some specifics and some best practices. Here are some companies that I think are doing some great work. I'm going to start with L'Oreal at the top. What I really like with what L'Oreal has done is being the website reveal, which gamifies its recruitment process. Essentially, it's a website that lets visitors communicate with employees and then be part of real-life problem-solving scenarios in essentially a virtual environment. What it does, which I think is pretty clever, is that those that visit can collect points and can receive feedback. So if you're trying to test some of the capabilities of your teams, that's maybe one great way to get them to test. And the thing that it's really fascinating for me is the fact that those visitors with that are highest ranked and gets the most points then actually compete for prizes and job opportunities with L'Oreal. So it's a really interesting initiative. I'll move on to clockwise to Deloitte. Deloitte has recently acquired a San Francisco digital agency called HUB. So when you're in a situation where you see a business opportunity, and Deloitte definitely saw one there, rather than go for partnerships, they went straight for the jugular and went for an acquisition. An example that I saw was the fact that Deloitte, after the acquisition, thanks to its long-standing relationship with LG, was able to start to develop a digital marketing strategy for LG in ways that it would have never been possible had it competed in partnership with another firm. The fact that they could freely share the sales data, customer preference information that they had as a consulting partner to LG with the San Francisco agency that they had acquired, so with Heat, was a real breakthrough for them. Boehringer Ingelheim, pharmaceutical company. I thought, again, this is an attempt at creating partnerships. This one is more focused on analytics. Essentially, they partnered with Kaggle, a platform for data prediction competitions, to create predictive models for clinical research. And the partnership was essentially aimed at leveraging the skills of data scientists that are part of the Kaggle platform. And essentially, these scientists were tasked with developing models to be used for drug development. The competition it was 3 months long, and it attracted 700 teams that between them submitted, I think, about 9,000 entries. So quite an extraordinary amount. And differently from Deloitte or L'Oreal, they did not necessarily incorporate those skills and capabilities in the organization, but they felt that they had them on tap, and that allowed them to then incorporate all the insight back into the business once they got it. Barclays. Barclays used a slightly different model in that they've actually had this for a while now. They created a program called the Barclays Accelerate. It's a 13-week-long program that is open to startups. Those startups are encouraged to be part of this program because they get guidance from key decision makers at Barclays who, by the way, are looking for innovative solutions in the space of fintech. So how lucky of Barclays to, how magnanimous of Barclays, I should say, to open the doors to all these innovations and then reap the rewards of it. Having said that, those startup founders would get up to $120,000 in investment from Techstars, who's the partner of Barclays in this, and a bunch of corporate perks. Especially if you're at the start of a journey, it's nice to have a nice office in which to welcome new potential clients. They get access to technical expertise and obviously cutting edge resources because of the space itself. The last one, which is one that I worked on last year specifically, Hershey. What I like about the Hershey model that we developed was the fact that we got them to up their skills very fast, very quickly. So we paired Hershey executives with executives from other organizations who had led different and complementary digital initiatives, and who had learned a great deal through the process, just as the Hershey executives had in other areas. And we paired them to solve some, essentially around digital problem solving through some digital hackathons. The learning and the sharing was extraordinary. In the space of a day, the ability for people to recognize resources that they were missing, skill sets that were where they had gaps, was one of the most exciting outcomes of the program. And in the process, they also got to think of new projects that they wanted to work on. Given that the participants were from radically different industries, we didn't have the issue of competition, and the participants were carefully selected to make sure that they would be able to contribute from the get-go. So here are some best practices. Going back to one of the original questions that was asked, and I'll close with that, and then we can open for discussion if that's okay with you, Kim.
Sure.
One way to get to building those resources pretty quickly and fast are two learning labs. We call them the what and the wow and the how. And it's all the wow, because we think that they're pretty effective. The first one is decoding what digital success looks like. And so figuring out what are the frameworks, tools, and conditions that lead to success. How do you get them inside the organization? How do you build them? And how do you start to create a common understanding of what digital looks like? And the second part is around this preparedness, readiness. And so if you have already created a common culture and already have a digital strategy in place, how do we make sure that it's integrated and that there is alignment across the entirety of the organization? And how do we help you take away some of the challenges and obstacles along the way? I'm going to share a thank you. Thank you so much for listening. And here's my email address and our website. Please visit us. We have a page with insights, so there's always new stuff coming in. Please join us and continue the conversation with me and Kim.
Great. So let's see if we've got any more questions from the group. I know somebody did ask, and I responded back via text. I'll mention it to everybody. Yes, these slides will be available. And yes, we are recording this webinar, and we will be making the link to the recorded session available to you as well. And I'll be sending that out to anybody who was not able to join in to the webinar. Somebody just asked, can we also get the framework document? Joe, do you have a document that breaks down your...
Yes, I do. So just send me an email and I'll be happy to share.
Yep. Yeah, I think that reaching out to Joe and getting more access to the resources at the University of Arizona would be a phenomenal thing. They've done some amazing work in this whole area of looking at businesses as they go through this process of digital transformation and really helping to prepare leaders and executives for taking advantage of those opportunities. And that's the question I guess I want to ask you, Joe. Can you talk a little bit more about what you're finding as you engage with executives through your program in terms of their concerns, their vision? How are they thinking about this whole space as they come and engage you and engage their fellow colleagues there at the University of Arizona, whether it be business leaders, and I know that's a lot of who you're meeting with or who are coming out to your program, the CEO, COOs, or whether it's the IT leaders?
That's a great question. So I'll tackle the first one that came to mind. There's a bunch, but I want to put a special focus on one particular area. One of the things that we are seeing, especially in more mature industries, is the realization that they themselves are at a loss. So the example that I was giving at the very beginning of the company that wanted for me to give them a digital list of keywords that they could use, kind of points to me to a real sense of inadequacy that many established leaders have. And especially for, if I want to be more specific and address a question that one of your listeners had, certain industries like consumer products, utilities, have this gap in generational gap of individuals that are not going to be there to sustain the organization for the next 10 years. And so there's the old guard, if we want to call it that, and those are the CEOs and the C-suite that are coming to us who are telling us, I'm retiring in 5 years. And quite frankly, if I look at my millennials and my digital talent, they're really good at this stuff, but they don't get the big picture. They really struggle with making sense of how digital technologies can address some of the big problems that we're going to have, whether it is resource scarcity or whether it is people on the move, climate change. There is a real sense that some of these people are not really well equipped to lead digital initiatives that can help with addressing some of these problems. And when I talk to the millennials, there is a real sense that they would want to take on some of the work, but they really don't know how to. So I'd say that that's probably what's top of mind for many, and why there is probably a big gap in the creation of a common culture that I know you, Kim, are looking to address and help develop in organizations.
Yes, absolutely. I don't see any more questions from the audience. If anybody's got anything, please feel free. And if you think of some questions after the fact, please feel free. While you're thinking through some potentially some last minute points, I'm going to go ahead and throw up a slide here to again thank Joe for his phenomenal presentation that we're going to make available to everybody. I do also want to announce our next Leading Digital Transformation web talk will be coming up on the 21st of April. That's a Friday. So a little bit off cycle, but we're doing it on a Friday from 1 to 2 p.m., same time, Eastern time. Now this time we're going to be meeting with Tom Catalini, the CIO of the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. Great friend of mine, phenomenal public speaker. He's going to talk the digital transformation of you, what every leader needs. Why every leader needs a digital presence, and he's going to give you some tips on how to make that happen. So that's Tom Catalini coming up, and I do hope that you can join us. Again, I want to give a shout out to my friends from Signature Consultants. Thanks again for hosting us. being a thought leader in this space on digital transformation as we go forward. You know, leadership is a daily activity, and everybody really needs to think through how they're going to engage their staffs and their teams and their partners every day from a leadership perspective. Joe, you've given us some phenomenal insights on digital transformation, the talent gap, and the leadership drivers that can really make this happen. So I can't thank you enough for joining us all the way from Arizona. For those of you that have been on the line, thank you too. It's been phenomenal to have such a great large group. We have an amazing audience here today. Contact me, contact Joe, reach out to us if there's anything that we can do to assist you in your journey. We're here. We'll make this information available to you, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
And shout out to Hugh and all the Wildcats in this presentation. Bear down.
All right, bear down. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.